When a parent drops their child off with a babysitter, they're making the ultimate act of trust, believing their most precious gift will be safe and protected. But what happens when that trust is shattered by the very person who was supposed to care for them? In the quiet suburbs of Wisconsin, Marissa Titsort seemed like any other mother trying to make ends meet. At 28 years old, with 5 children of her own and another on the way, she had turned to babysitting as a way to earn extra income for her growing family. To the parents in her neighborhood, she appeared to be a natural choice, someone who understood the challenges of raising young children and could provide the care their little ones needed. But beneath this facade of maternal warmth lay a darkness so profound that it would ultimately claim the life of an innocent baby. On October 18th, 2018, a mother made what should have been a routine decision. She needed someone to watch her 2-month-old son and her other young child while she ran errands. Titsort had been recommended by others in the community, and with limited childcare options available, the mother felt she had found a reliable solution. She dropped off her children at Titsort's home around 3:30 in the afternoon, never imagining that this would be the last time she would see her baby alive. For the next few hours, the infant was alone with Titsort, while the other children played nearby. What happened during those crucial moments would forever change multiple families and expose a pattern of violence that had been hidden in plain sight for years. According to investigators, sometime between 3:30 and 4 in the afternoon, Titsort committed an act so heinous that it defied all understanding of human nature. She took the life of the helpless 2-month-old boy who had been placed in her care. But the true horror of Titsort's crime wasn't just the murder itself. It was the calculated deception that followed. When she realized the baby was dead, she didn't call for help. She didn't attempt CPR. She didn't scream or panic, or do any of the things a normal person would do when faced with such a tragedy. Instead, she made a cold, deliberate choice that revealed the depth of her depravity. Titsort later confessed to investigators that she knew the baby was dead the moment she felt his cold body. She admitted that she didn't check for a pulse, didn't reach out for help, and didn't perform any resuscitation efforts. The child's lifeless form lay on the floor of her hallway as she formulated a plan to cover up what she had done. With chilling precision, she grabbed the baby's snowsuit from his car seat and dressed his corpse, then carefully placed his body back in the carrier, arranging blankets around him to create the illusion that he was simply sleeping. At 6 o'clock that evening, hours after she had killed the infant, Titsort did something that demonstrated just how twisted her mind truly was. She sent the baby's mother a text message, not about the child's condition, but about a news story. She told the mother that a local news site had posted an article about child abuse charges that had been filed against her. This wasn't a confession or a cry for help. It was a calculated move designed to plant seeds of doubt and create an alternative narrative for what was about to unfold. When the mother arrived to pick up her children, Titsort handed over the car seat containing her dead son with a casual demeanor that would haunt investigators for years to come. She told the mother that the baby had been sleeping peacefully and seemed fine. The unsuspecting mother took her children and left, completely unaware that she was now carrying her son's corpse. It wasn't until the mother tried to wake her baby at a local laundromat that the horrifying truth began to emerge. The child was cold, unresponsive, and clearly dead. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but it was far too late. The 2-month-old was pronounced dead, and what had seemed like a tragic accident was about to be revealed as something far more sinister. The investigation that followed uncovered a pattern of violence that should have been a massive red flag to anyone considering leaving their children with Titsort. This wasn't her first victim. Just 1 year earlier, a 3-month-old child in her care had suffered a skull fracture. Despite the severity of the injury and the suspicious circumstances, she had not been charged in that case. The warning signs were there, written in the broken bones of an innocent baby, but somehow they had been ignored. The trail of destruction stretched back even further. In 2010, Titsort's own boyfriend had filed a temporary restraining order against her, alleging that she had abused their 2 sons. Social workers had removed her 4 children from her home due to safety concerns. Yet somehow, she'd continued to present herself as a suitable caregiver for other people's children. The criminal complaint revealed the systematic nature of her deception and the cold calculation behind her actions. Between the time she killed the baby and the time she handed his body over to his mother, she had multiple opportunities to call for help, to confess what she had done, or to show even a shred of remorse. Instead, she chose to compound her crime with an elaborate cover-up that prolonged the family's agony and demonstrated a complete absence of human empathy. What makes Titsort's case particularly disturbing is how she exploited the trust that parents place in babysitters. She used her own status as a mother to gain credibility, presenting herself as someone who would naturally understand how to care for children. Parents saw her large family and assumed she had experience and maternal instincts that would keep their children safe. Instead, she used their vulnerability against them, turning what should have been a protective environment into a death trap. The psychological profile that emerged during the investigation painted a picture of a woman who saw children not as precious human beings deserving of love and protection, but as obstacles to be eliminated when they became inconvenient. Her history of violence against her own children and those in her care suggested a pattern of escalating aggression that ultimately culminated in murder. The impact of Titsort's crimes extended far beyond the immediate victims. The baby's family was destroyed by grief and the unimaginable trauma of losing their child to someone they had trusted. The parents who had previously used her services were forced to confront the horrifying reality that their own children had been in mortal danger. The entire community was left questioning how such a monster could have hidden among them for so long. During court proceedings, the full extent of Titsort's callousness became apparent. She showed no remorse for her actions and seemed more concerned with avoiding consequences than acknowledging the pain she had caused. Her demeanor throughout the legal process reinforced the perception that she was a dangerous individual who posed an ongoing threat to any child who might come into her care. The case highlighted critical failures in the childcare system and the informal networks that many parents rely on when seeking babysitting services. There were no background checks, no licensing requirements, and no oversight of Titsort's activities, despite her documented history of child abuse. Parents were left to make life or death decisions about their children's safety, based on recommendations from neighbors and friends who had no way of knowing about her violent past. Titsort's story serves as a chilling reminder that evil can wear the mask of maternal concern and that the people we trust most with our children can sometimes be the very ones who pose the greatest threat. Her case would become a cautionary tale about the importance of thorough background checks and the need for parents to trust their instincts when something doesn't feel right about a caregiver. The 2-month-old baby, whose life she took, will never get to experience his first steps, his first words, or any of the countless milestones that every parent dreams of witnessing. His death was not just a tragedy, but a preventable crime that exposed the dangerous gaps in how we protect our most vulnerable citizens from those who would harm them. The investigation into Titsort's crimes was still making headlines when another horrifying case emerged from across the country, one that would shake the foundations of trust between families and their caregivers forever. In the heart of Manhattan, Marina Krim lived what many would consider a privileged life. She was a mother of 3 beautiful children, living in a spacious apartment on the Upper West Side with her husband Kevin, a successful executive. Their nanny, Yoselin Ortega, had been with the family for over 2 years, caring for their children with what appeared to be genuine affection and dedication. At 50 years old, Ortega seemed like the perfect caregiver, someone with enough life experience to handle the challenges of watching active young children while maintaining the trust and respect of their parents. But on October 25th, 2012, that carefully constructed facade would crumble in the most devastating way imaginable. Marina had spent the afternoon out with her middle child, picking up her 6-year-old daughter Lucia from her swimming lesson. When they returned to the apartment around 5:30 in the evening, she expected to find Ortega with her youngest children, 2-year-old Leo and 6-month-old Nessie, going through their normal evening routine. Instead, she walked into a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The apartment was eerily quiet, and Ortega was nowhere to be seen. Marina called out but received no response. She began searching the rooms, her concern growing with each passing moment. When she reached the bathroom, she discovered a horror so profound that it defied all human comprehension. In the bathtub, she found the bodies of her 2 youngest children. 6-year-old Lucia and 2-year-old Leo lay motionless, their throats slashed with such violence that the bathroom had become a crime scene of unimaginable brutality. The water around them was stained crimson, and it was immediately clear that both children were beyond saving. Marina's screams echoed through the apartment building as she realized that the woman she had trusted with her most precious possessions had transformed into their executioner. Ortega was found in the same bathroom, collapsed on the floor with self-inflicted stab wounds to her neck and wrists. Unlike her young victims, her injuries were superficial, a failed attempt at suicide that would ultimately leave her alive to face the consequences of her actions. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but it was far too late for Lucia and Leo. They were pronounced dead at the hospital, their lives cut short by the very person who was supposed to protect them. The investigation that followed revealed a disturbing pattern of workplace resentment and financial disputes that had been festering beneath the surface of what appeared to be a normal employer-employee relationship. Ortega had been expressing anger about her wages and working conditions, but no one could have predicted that her dissatisfaction would manifest in such a horrific act of violence. According to police interviews, Ortega had become increasingly agitated about money in the weeks leading up to the murders. She felt that the Krim family wasn't paying her fairly and had been making demands for additional compensation that the family found unreasonable. What started as a workplace disagreement had somehow escalated in her mind to justify the systematic slaughter of innocent children. The method of the murders revealed a level of premeditation and rage that shocked even experienced homicide investigators. The children's throats had been slashed with kitchen knives in what appeared to be a frenzied attack. The brutality of the wounds suggested that Ortega had not simply lost control in a moment of anger, but had deliberately chosen to inflict maximum suffering on her young victims. Marina Krim's world collapsed in that bathroom. In a matter of seconds, she had lost 2 of her 3 children to someone she had welcomed into their home, someone who had shared meals with their family and been present for countless intimate moments of their daily lives. The betrayal was as devastating as the loss itself, shattering her ability to trust anyone with the safety of her surviving child. The case sent shockwaves through New York City's wealthy neighborhoods, where many families rely on nannies and babysitters to care for their children while they work demanding careers. Parents who had never questioned the backgrounds of their caregivers suddenly found themselves wondering if they truly knew the people they had entrusted with their most valuable possessions. During her recovery in the hospital, Ortega remained largely unresponsive to police questioning. When she was finally able to speak, she offered no coherent explanation for her actions beyond her anger about money. The disconnect between her motive and the severity of her response revealed a mind that had somehow justified the murder of children as an appropriate reaction to a workplace dispute. The psychological evaluation that followed painted a picture of a woman whose grip on reality had become dangerously distorted. She had convinced herself that the Krim family was treating her unfairly and that her violent response was somehow justified. The fact that she had chosen to target the children rather than the parents themselves suggested a particularly twisted form of revenge, one designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on the people she blamed for her problems. Proceedings began, the full scope of. As the legal Ortega's betrayal became clear, she had been living a double life, presenting herself as a caring and trustworthy caregiver while harboring resentments that would ultimately explode into homicidal violence. The family had no warning signs, no indication that the woman they saw playing with their children and preparing their meals was capable of such monstrous acts. The trial revealed disturbing details about the final moments of Lucia and Leo's lives. The children had been in their own home, in a place where they should have felt completely safe, when they were attacked by someone they knew and trusted. The psychological trauma of their final moments was almost too horrific to contemplate. Kevin Krim, the children's father, was left to grapple with unimaginable grief while trying to support his surviving wife and daughter. The family's entire world had been destroyed by a woman they had treated as part of their household, someone they had trusted with their most precious gifts. The case highlighted the vulnerability of children to those in positions of trust and authority over them. Ortega had complete access to the children, knew their routines and vulnerabilities, and used that knowledge to carry out her deadly plan. The very intimacy that makes a good caregiver effective had been weaponized against her innocent victims. Community response was swift and intense. Parents throughout the city began conducting more thorough background checks on their childcare providers and questioning whether they truly knew the people they were leaving their children with. The case had shattered the assumption that someone who appeared caring and maternal could be trusted without verification. The investigation also revealed the importance of recognizing warning signs of workplace dissatisfaction among caregivers. While financial disputes are common in any employment relationship, the intensity of Ortega's anger should have been a red flag that something was seriously wrong with her mental state. The Ortega case became a defining moment in how families approach childcare, but it was far from the only instance of a trusted caregiver becoming a killer. Just as parents were beginning to process the horror of what had happened in Manhattan, another story was unfolding that would prove even more disturbing in its scope and systematic nature. Christine Falling appeared to be nothing more than a troubled young woman trying to make her way in the world when she began offering babysitting services to families in rural Florida. At just 17 years old, she seemed harmless enough. A quiet girl from a difficult background who needed work and appeared to enjoy spending time with children. Parents in the small communities around Blountstown saw her as an affordable option for childcare, someone who could watch their little ones while they worked or ran errands. But Christine Falling was not just troubled. She was a predator who had discovered that babysitting gave her access to the most vulnerable victims imaginable. Her childhood had been marked by disturbing behavior that should have served as a warning to anyone considering leaving children in her care. She had tortured and killed small animals from an early age, often dropping cats from heights to test their supposed 9 lives. This cruelty toward defenseless creatures was a classic warning sign that mental health professionals now recognize as a predictor of violence toward humans. Her first victim was 2-year-old Cassidy Johnson. On February 25, 1980, Cassidy was rushed to a doctor's office in Blountstown after becoming ill while in Falling's care. The little girl was diagnosed with encephalitis, a serious brain inflammation, and died 3 days later. An autopsy revealed the true cause of death was blunt force trauma to the skull. When questioned by police, Falling claimed that Cassidy had simply passed out and fallen from her crib, an explanation that seemed plausible enough to avoid immediate suspicion. But Cassidy was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, Falling would kill again and again, using her position as a babysitter to gain access to helpless infants and toddlers. Her method was suffocation, pressing pillows and blankets over the faces of sleeping children until they stopped breathing. The intimate nature of these murders, carried out in the quiet privacy of family homes, while parents trusted her with their most precious possessions, made them particularly horrifying. What made Falling's crimes even more chilling was her apparent ability to compartmentalize her actions. She could murder a child in the afternoon and then go about her evening as if nothing had happened. Parents would return home to find their babysitter behaving normally, expressing appropriate concern when they discovered their child had stopped breathing. Her performance was so convincing that she was rarely considered a suspect in the initial investigations. The pattern continued with devastating regularity. Each death was initially attributed to sudden infant death syndrome or other natural causes. The medical technology and investigative techniques of the early 1980s were not sophisticated enough to immediately identify the signs of suffocation in very young children, especially when the perpetrator was someone who had been trusted with their care. Falling's ability to find new families willing to hire her spoke to the informal nature of childcare arrangements in small rural communities. Word-of-mouth recommendations and personal connections were often the only screening process parents used when selecting a babysitter. There were no background check systems in place, no licensing requirements for informal childcare providers, and no central database where families could research the history of potential caregivers. The breakthrough in the case came when police began to notice a disturbing pattern. Multiple infant deaths had occurred while children were in Falling's care, and the statistical probability of such coincidences occurring naturally was virtually impossible. When investigators finally confronted her with this evidence, the facade she had maintained for years finally cracked. In a confession that shocked even experienced law enforcement officers, Falling admitted to murdering 3 children. She told police that voices in her head had commanded her to kill the babies, a claim that would later be disputed by mental health professionals who found her competent to stand trial. Her explanation revealed a mind that had somehow justified the systematic murder of innocent children as a response to auditory hallucinations. The details of her confessions were particularly disturbing because they revealed the calculated nature of her crimes. She had deliberately sought out babysitting opportunities, knowing that they would give her access to vulnerable victims. She had perfected her method of suffocation to avoid leaving obvious signs of trauma, and she had developed a repertoire of believable explanations for the sudden deaths that occurred in her care. The families of her victims were left to grapple with the horrifying realization that someone they had trusted with their children's lives had been systematically murdering them. Parents who had used her services but whose children had survived were forced to confront the possibility that their own kids had been in mortal danger every moment they spent alone with her. Falling's case highlighted the vulnerability of very young children to caregivers who wish them harm. Infants and toddlers cannot communicate what is happening to them, cannot fight back against an adult attacker, and cannot escape from dangerous situations. Their complete dependence on adult caregivers makes them perfect victims for predators who understand how to exploit that vulnerability. The psychological profile that emerged during her prosecution painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual who had found a way to satisfy her homicidal urges while maintaining a facade of normalcy. She had discovered that society's assumption that women are naturally nurturing and protective of children provided her with perfect cover for her crimes. The impact of Falling's murders extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. The entire community was forced to confront the possibility that other trusted caregivers might be harboring similar dark impulses. Parents began questioning their own judgment and wondering if they could ever truly know whether someone was safe to leave their children with. During her trial, Falling's defense team attempted to argue that she was mentally ill and therefore not fully responsible for her actions. However, the systematic nature of her crimes and her ability to avoid detection for so long suggested a level of calculation and planning that contradicted claims of insanity. She had clearly understood that her actions were wrong, as evidenced by her efforts to conceal them and provide alternative explanations for the deaths. The legal proceedings also revealed the inadequacy of the mental health system's ability to identify and treat individuals who posed a danger to children. Falling had exhibited warning signs from an early age, but there had been no intervention or treatment that might have prevented her from becoming a serial killer. Her case became an argument for more comprehensive screening and support systems for troubled youth. When Falling was finally sentenced to life in prison, it marked the end of a reign of terror that had claimed multiple innocent lives and shattered the sense of security that families felt when leaving their children with babysitters. Her case became a landmark in the study of serial killers who target children, providing insights into the psychology of individuals who exploit positions of trust to harm the most vulnerable members of society. The ripple effects of her crimes would be felt for decades as parents became more cautious about informal childcare arrangements and communities developed better systems for screening potential caregivers. But for the families who had lost children to her calculated violence, no amount of systemic improvement could bring back the little ones whose lives had been cut short by someone they had trusted to protect them. As investigators were still processing the scope of Falling's crimes, another case was developing that would demonstrate how modern technology could both enable and expose the darkest impulses of those who prey upon children. Kirsty Flood appeared to be just another young woman struggling to make ends meet when she began advertising her babysitting services to families in Sandy Springs, Georgia. At 29 years old, she seemed capable enough to handle the responsibilities of caring for young children, and her rates were affordable for working parents who needed reliable childcare. But beneath her seemingly normal exterior, Flood was harboring thoughts and impulses that would ultimately lead to the brutal murder of a 2-year-old girl. What made Flood's case particularly disturbing was the digital trail she left behind, a window into her deteriorating mental state that revealed her crime was not a moment of lost control, but the result of premeditated malice. Her internet search history, uncovered during the police investigation, provided a chilling glimpse into the mind of someone who was actively planning to harm a child. In the days leading up to the murder, Flood had conducted searches that revealed her twisted fascination with child abuse. She had looked up phrases like, "What type of people enjoy abusing other people's children? And what does it mean to have a sudden urge to beat a child that's not yours?" These searches demonstrated that she was not only contemplating violence against children, but was actively researching and rationalizing her impulses. The systematic nature of her research suggested that Flood was not simply experiencing random violent thoughts, but was deliberately cultivating and planning to act on them. She was using the internet as a tool to validate her desires and possibly to learn techniques for harming children while avoiding detection. This digital evidence would prove crucial in establishing the premeditated nature of her crime. On December 9, 2019, Flood was babysitting 2-year-old Fallon Fridley when her violent fantasies became reality. The little girl had been left in her care by parents who had no reason to suspect that their babysitter was harboring homicidal thoughts toward their child. What happened next was an act of brutality so severe that it defied all understanding of human nature. According to the medical examiner's report, Fallon died from blunt force trauma consistent with severe beating. The injuries were so extensive that they could not have been caused by an accidental fall or any other explanation that Flood would later offer to investigators. The 2-year-old had been systematically beaten to death by someone who was supposed to be protecting her. When police arrived at the scene, Flood initially attempted to claim that Fallon had been injured in an accidental fall at a local park. She told officers that the child had hit her head on a slide and had not woken up afterward. This explanation might have been believable if not for the severity and pattern of injuries that the autopsy revealed. The medical evidence painted a very different picture of what had occurred. Fallon had suffered multiple traumatic injuries that were inconsistent with any accidental cause. The pattern of damage suggested a prolonged and vicious assault, one that could only have been inflicted intentionally by an adult attacker. The child's injuries were so severe that they would have caused immediate incapacitation, making it impossible for her to have sustained them during normal play activities. As the investigation progressed, police discovered Flood's disturbing internet search history, which provided crucial evidence of premeditation. The searches she had conducted in the weeks before the murder showed that she had been actively fantasizing about harming children and researching the psychology behind such impulses. This digital trail transformed what might have been treated as a case of temporary insanity into clear evidence of calculated murder. The discovery of Flood's search history also revealed that her crime was part of a larger pattern of criminal behavior. Police records showed that she had been involved in 6 separate incidents since August of that year, ranging from theft to harassment and criminal trespass. This history of escalating antisocial behavior should have been a red flag to anyone considering hiring her as a caregiver. The psychological profile that emerged during Flood's prosecution revealed a woman who had been deliberately seeking opportunities to harm children while maintaining a facade of being a reliable caregiver. Her ability to present herself as trustworthy to unsuspecting parents while simultaneously researching methods of child abuse demonstrated a level of calculated deception that chilled investigators to their core. The impact on Fallon's family was devastating beyond measure. They had trusted Flood with their most precious gift, believing that their daughter would be safe and cared for while they were away. Instead, they returned to find their child's life had been brutally ended by the very person they had hired to protect her. The betrayal was as traumatic as the loss itself, leaving them to question how they could have failed to recognize the danger that Flood posed. During court proceedings, the evidence against Flood was overwhelming. Her internet search history provided a clear timeline of premeditation, while the medical evidence left no doubt about the intentional nature of Fallon's injuries. The combination of digital evidence and forensic findings painted a picture of a woman who had systematically planned and executed the murder of an innocent child. Flood was ultimately charged with multiple counts of murder and child cruelty, facing the possibility of life in prison for her crimes. Her case became a stark reminder of how modern technology can provide insights into the minds of criminals, while also serving as a tool for those planning to commit heinous acts. The digital footprints that people leave behind can often reveal their true intentions long before they act on their darkest impulses. The investigation also highlighted the importance of comprehensive background checks for anyone seeking to work with children. Flood's history of criminal behavior and her disturbing online activities should have disqualified her from any position involving childcare, but the informal nature of many babysitting arrangements meant that parents had no way of accessing this crucial information. As communities grappled with the implications of Flood's crime, another case was unfolding in Oklahoma that would demonstrate how some predators develop patterns of violence that span multiple victims across several years. Holly Shepherd had been operating as a babysitter in the Oklahoma area for several years when her pattern of violence finally came to light. At 28 years old, she appeared to be a responsible caregiver who could be trusted with the most vulnerable members of society. Parents who hired her through social media platforms believed they were making a safe choice for their children, unaware that they were placing their little ones in the hands of someone who had already demonstrated a willingness to harm infants in her care. The investigation into Shepherd's crimes began when a 2-month-old child was brought to an Oklahoma hospital on June 14, 2023, suffering from seizures and internal bleeding. The infant's condition was so severe that medical staff immediately recognized the signs of abusive head trauma, injuries that could not have occurred through normal handling or accidental means. Police quickly determined that Shepherd had been babysitting the child at the time the injuries occurred. When questioned about what had happened, she initially provided a series of changing explanations that immediately raised red flags for investigators. Her inability to maintain a consistent story suggested that she was attempting to cover up her involvement in the child's injuries. As the investigation progressed, Shepherd's story continued to evolve in ways that made her appear increasingly suspicious. She eventually claimed that she had accidentally tripped while holding the baby, causing her to drop the infant and inflict the traumatic injuries. This explanation was immediately questioned by medical professionals who noted that the pattern and severity of the child's injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators discovered a connection to an earlier incident from 2018. 5 years earlier, another infant had been seriously injured while in the care of a babysitter who had been found through social media. At the time, police had been unable to establish definitively who was responsible for that child's injuries, and no charges had been filed. Detective Corey Carden, who had worked on the earlier case, recognized similarities between the two incidents when he heard about the more recent injury. Both cases involved very young infants. Both had occurred while the children were in the care of babysitters found through social media, and both had resulted in the type of traumatic brain injuries that are typically associated with abusive shaking or impact. When investigators compared the details of both cases, they realized that Shepherd had been the common factor. She had been 21 years old at the time of the first incident and had been caring for that infant when the injuries occurred. The realization that she might have been harming children for years sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community and the families who had used her services. The pattern that emerged was particularly disturbing because it suggested that Shepherd had been operating as a serial child abuser for at least 5 years without being detected or stopped. She had managed to continue finding new families willing to hire her despite having seriously injured at least 2 infants in her care. The informal nature of social media-based childcare arrangements had provided her with a steady stream of potential victims. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a pediatric specialist who consulted on both cases, noted the similarities in the injuries sustained by both children. The pattern of brain trauma was consistent with what medical professionals call abusive head trauma, previously known as shaken baby syndrome. This type of injury occurs when an infant is violently shaken or when their head is impacted against a hard surface with significant force. The medical evidence suggested that both children had been subjected to deliberate violence rather than accidental harm. The severity of the injuries required a level of force that could not have been generated through normal childcare activities or minor accidents. Someone had intentionally inflicted traumatic brain injuries on helpless infants who were completely dependent on their caregiver for protection. When police presented their findings to the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office, prosecutors agreed that there was sufficient evidence to charge Shepherd in connection with both incidents. The decision to pursue charges in the earlier case, despite the passage of 5 years, sent a strong message that crimes against children would not be forgotten or ignored simply because time had passed. The investigation also revealed the challenges that law enforcement faces when dealing with crimes against very young children. Infants cannot communicate what has happened to them, cannot identify their attackers, and often cannot survive long enough to provide evidence of the abuse they have suffered. This makes it extremely difficult to build cases against those who harm them. Shepherd's method of finding victims through social media platforms highlighted a growing concern about the safety of informal childcare arrangements. Parents who are desperate for affordable babysitting services often turn to online platforms where they can connect with caregivers in their area. While these platforms provide convenience and accessibility, they often lack the screening and background check systems that formal childcare providers are required to maintain. The case also demonstrated the importance of maintaining detailed records and sharing information between law enforcement agencies. If not for Detective Carden's memory of the earlier case and his willingness to investigate potential connections, Shepherd might have continued harming children indefinitely. The systematic comparison of cases involving similar injuries and circumstances proved crucial in identifying her pattern of violence. Deputy Chief Josh Henderson of the Ponca City Police Department described Shepherd's crimes as inexcusable and representing a profound betrayal of the trust placed in someone responsible for a child's care. His words captured the sentiment of a community that was struggling to understand how someone could repeatedly harm the most innocent and defenseless members of society. The impact of Shepherd's crimes extended far beyond her immediate victims. Parents throughout the region began questioning the safety of their own childcare arrangements and wondering if they had unknowingly placed their children in danger. The case served as a wake-up call about the need for better screening and oversight of informal childcare providers. As the legal proceedings against Shepherd moved forward, another case was making headlines in Nebraska that would shock the nation with its sheer brutality and the age of the victim involved. Sherry Lynn Marler's case represented one of the most violent and senseless acts of child murder committed by a babysitter in recent memory. when she was entrusted with the care of 5-year-old Annabelle Nolles, parents believed they had found someone who could provide safe and reliable childcare for their daughter. Instead, they had unknowingly placed their child in the hands of someone who would brutally end her life through an act of violence so extreme that it defied all comprehension. The crime occurred on November 26, 2022, when Annabelle was spending time in Marla's care. What should have been a routine babysitting arrangement turned into a nightmare when Marla's violent impulses overwhelmed any sense of humanity or protective instinct she might have possessed toward the child in her care. According to the probable cause affidavit filed by police, Marla admitted to investigators that she was responsible for Annabelle's fatal injuries. Her confession revealed a level of brutality that shocked even experienced law enforcement officers who had seen the worst of human behavior. She told police that she had struck the 5-year-old in the head approximately 5 to 10 times, using what she described as a clapping motion. The method of attack was particularly disturbing because it suggested a prolonged and deliberate assault, rather than a momentary loss of control. The repeated blows to Annabelle's head demonstrated a sustained level of violence that continued long after the child would have been incapacitated and unable to defend herself. The image of an adult systematically beating a helpless 5-year-old to death was almost too horrific for investigators to process. Emergency medical personnel responded to the scene and immediately began attempting to save Annabelle's life, but the injuries she had sustained were too severe to overcome. She was initially transported to South Lincoln Medical Center, where doctors quickly realized that her condition was beyond their ability to treat. Due to the severity of her injuries, she was then airlifted to Primary Children's Hospital in Utah, where specialized pediatric trauma teams made desperate attempts to save her life. Despite the best efforts of multiple medical teams, Annabelle succumbed to her injuries at approximately 9 in the morning on November 26th. The little girl who had been full of life and promise just hours earlier was now gone, her future stolen by someone who had been trusted to protect her. Her death marked the end of a young life that had barely begun and left her family devastated by grief and the incomprehensible nature of her murder. The investigation that followed revealed inconsistencies between Marla's initial explanation of events and the physical evidence found at the scene. Police noted that the injuries Annabelle had sustained did not appear consistent with the story that Marla had initially told officers. This discrepancy prompted investigators to dig deeper into what had actually occurred during the time the child was in her care. As detectives continued their investigation, the true scope of Marla's violence became apparent. The medical examiner's report detailed injuries that could only have been inflicted through deliberate and sustained assault. The pattern of trauma to Annabelle's head showed clear evidence of multiple impacts, each one potentially fatal on its own, but delivered in rapid succession during what must have been a terrifying final few minutes of the child's life. The psychological evaluation of Marla that followed her arrest attempted to understand what could drive someone to commit such a heinous act against an innocent child. However, no amount of analysis could provide a satisfactory explanation for why she had chosen to brutally murder a 5-year-old who had been placed in her care by trusting parents. The impact on Annabelle's family was absolutely devastating. They had lost their daughter in the most violent and senseless way imaginable, at the hands of someone they had believed would keep her safe. The betrayal was as traumatic as the loss itself, leaving them to struggle with questions about how they could have failed to recognize the danger that Marla posed to their child. The case sent shockwaves through the Nebraska community and beyond, as parents everywhere were forced to confront the reality that even the most basic assumptions about childcare safety could be deadly wrong. The idea that someone would accept responsibility for caring for a child and then systematically beat that child to death challenged fundamental beliefs about human nature and maternal instinct. During the legal proceedings that followed, the evidence against Marla was overwhelming. Her own confession, combined with the medical evidence and the inconsistencies in her story, left little doubt about her guilt. The prosecution faced the difficult task of seeking justice for Annabelle, while also trying to understand how such a crime could have occurred. Marla's case highlighted the vulnerability of children to those in positions of authority and trust over them. 5-year-old Annabelle would have looked to her babysitter for protection and guidance, never imagining that the same person would become her killer. The complete reversal of the caregiver role from protector to predator represented one of the most fundamental betrayals possible in human relationships. The investigation also revealed the importance of thorough background checks and ongoing monitoring of childcare providers. While it was unclear whether any previous warning signs about Marla's potential for violence had been missed, her case served as a reminder that parents must be vigilant about who they trust with their children's lives. As the community struggled to process the horror of what had happened to Annabelle, another case was emerging from Australia that would demonstrate how obsession and jealousy could transform a trusted babysitter into a calculating killer with motives that went far beyond simple violence. Reed Robertson's transformation from trusted family babysitter to cold-blooded killer represents one of the most psychologically complex cases in the annals of childcare-related murder. Her obsession with 15-year-old Rachel Barber went far beyond mere jealousy, evolving into a twisted desire to literally become her young victim through the ultimate act of identity theft. Robertson had been babysitting for the Barber family for some time when her fixation on Rachel began to develop. At 19 years old, she saw in the teenage dancer everything she believed she lacked in herself. Rachel was beautiful, talented, popular, and seemed to embody all the qualities that Robertson desperately wished she possessed. This admiration gradually transformed into a dangerous obsession that would ultimately cost Rachel her life. The depth of Robertson's fixation became clear through the journal entries she kept, which provided a disturbing window into her deteriorating mental state. She wrote extensively about Rachel's physical attributes, describing her as strikingly attractive with very clear pale skin and hypnotic green eyes. In contrast, she described herself in harsh, self-deprecating terms as a pizza face with brown, oily hair and no coordination. These journal entries revealed that Robertson's relationship with Rachel had become unhealthily one-sided. While Rachel likely viewed her as just another adult in her extended family circle, Robertson was developing an elaborate fantasy about what her life could be like if she could somehow become Rachel. The psychological distance between admiration and deadly obsession was closing rapidly. Robertson's plan to murder Rachel was methodical and calculated, demonstrating a level of premeditation that was chilling in its thoroughness. On February 28, 1999, she called Rachel and told her about an opportunity to earn $100 by participating in a psychological study. The irony of using a fake psychological study as bait was lost on Robertson, who was herself displaying severely disturbed psychological behavior. The deception was carefully crafted to ensure that Rachel would come alone and that no one would know where she was going. Robertson specifically warned Rachel that she could not tell anyone about the study, or she would risk compromising the results. This instruction ensured that when Rachel disappeared, there would be no immediate trail leading back to Robertson. On March 1, 1999, Rachel met Robertson after her classes at the dance factory and accompanied her back to her apartment. The teenager had no reason to suspect that she was walking into a trap that had been months in the making. She trusted Robertson as someone who had been part of her family's life and who had always treated her well during their previous interactions. Once they arrived at Robertson's apartment, the facade of normalcy continued as Robertson offered Rachel a slice of pizza. This ordinary gesture masked the extraordinary violence that was about to unfold. Robertson had created an environment where Rachel felt safe and comfortable, making her completely vulnerable to the attack that followed. The murder itself was carried out with a level of personal intimacy that made it particularly horrifying. Robertson strangled Rachel to death with a telephone cord, a method that required close physical contact and sustained effort. This was not a crime of sudden passion, but a deliberate execution that Robertson had been planning for some time. After committing the murder, Robertson's behavior became even more disturbing. She kept Rachel's body in her apartment for 2 days, hidden in her wardrobe with the telephone cord still wrapped around her neck. During this time, she continued to go about her daily routine as if nothing had happened, demonstrating a level of psychological compartmentalization that was deeply unsettling. The discovery that investigators made in Robertson's apartment after the murder revealed the true depth of her obsession and the ultimate motive for her crime. They found an application for a birth certificate in Rachel's name, providing clear evidence that Robertson had intended to assume her victim's identity. She had not simply wanted to kill Rachel out of jealousy, she had wanted to become her. This attempt at identity theft represented the final piece of Robertson's twisted plan. By eliminating Rachel and assuming her identity, Robertson believed she could literally transform herself into the person she had always wanted to be. The psychological delusion that drove this plan was as disturbing as the violence she had used to carry it out. The investigation that followed Rachel's disappearance initially focused on the possibility that she had run away or been abducted by a stranger. Her family and friends could not believe that someone they knew and trusted could be responsible for her disappearance. Robertson's position as a trusted family friend initially placed her above suspicion. However, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in Robertson's story began to emerge. Her behavior following Rachel's disappearance was not consistent with that of someone who was genuinely concerned about the teenager's welfare. Police began to focus on her as a potential suspect, eventually leading to the discovery of Rachel's body and the evidence of Robertson's elaborate plan. The psychological profile that emerged during Robertson's prosecution revealed a deeply disturbed individual who had become completely disconnected from reality. Her journal entries and the evidence found in her apartment painted a picture of someone who had constructed an elaborate fantasy world in which murdering Rachel and stealing her identity was not only justified, but necessary. The case highlighted the dangers that can arise when babysitters or other caregivers develop inappropriate fixations on the children in their care. Robertson's position of trust within the Barber family had given her intimate access to Rachel's life and routines, information that she ultimately used to plan and execute her murder. For the Barber family, the betrayal was as devastating as the loss itself. They had welcomed Robertson into their home and trusted her with their children, never suspecting that she harbored such dangerous obsessions. The realization that their daughter's killer had been someone they knew and trusted added an extra layer of trauma to their grief. Robertson's case also demonstrated how social media and modern communication methods could be used by predators to manipulate and deceive their victims. Her use of a fabricated story about a psychological study showed how easily teenagers could be lured into dangerous situations by adults they trusted. The legal proceedings that followed resulted in Robertson being convicted of murder and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. However, no amount of punishment could undo the damage she had caused or restore Rachel's life and bright future that had been stolen from her. As investigators were still processing the psychological complexities of Robertson's crime, another case was developing that would demonstrate how quickly an untrained and unlicensed caregiver could cause fatal harm to an infant through gross negligence and possible deliberate violence. Paulina Carmona. Simbrron's entry into the world of childcare was as informal as it was deadly. The 47-year-old had only recently decided she wanted to work taking care of children, spreading the word among her family and neighbors in Taylorsville that she was available for babysitting services. What made her case particularly alarming was the complete absence of any formal training, licensing, or background screening that might have revealed her unsuitability for such work. On October 13th, 2022, a 5-month-old baby girl was placed in Carmona Simbrron's care by parents who had no way of knowing they were entrusting their most precious possession to someone who would prove catastrophically unfit for the responsibility. The informal nature of the arrangement meant that crucial warning signs about Carmona Simbrron's capabilities and temperament had gone undetected. Within hours of the baby being left in her care, emergency crews were responding to a call about an unresponsive infant at Carmona Simbrron's home. The Unified Fire Authority personnel who arrived at the scene found the 5-month-old in critical condition, her tiny body showing signs of trauma that would ultimately prove fatal. Despite desperate attempts to resuscitate the baby, her condition was so severe that she had to be transported to Primary Children's Hospital for emergency treatment. The medical examination that followed revealed injuries so devastating that they could not have occurred through normal childcare activities or minor accidents. Doctors discovered severe retinal hemorrhaging and severe tearing in the brain, injuries that painted a clear picture of violent trauma inflicted upon a helpless infant. The medical team treating the baby delivered the heartbreaking news that she was not expected to survive more than 72 hours. What made Carmona Simbrron's case particularly disturbing was the pattern of suspicious incidents that had occurred during her brief career as an unofficial babysitter. During a previous babysitting session, the same baby had returned home with a bruise on her cheek. When questioned about the injury, Carmona Simbrron had offered the implausible explanation that it had come from the infant lying face down on a toy. These horrific cases serve as stark reminders that evil can hide behind the most trusted facades, turning those meant to protect our children into their greatest threats. The women profiled here shattered the fundamental bond of trust between caregivers and families, leaving devastation in their wake that extends far beyond their immediate victims. If you found these shocking cases compelling, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which story disturbed you the most.